Hello, good evening, or afternoon. Everyone can watch these videos. It can be any time in the world when you watch these. Hello. I'm not streaming today because I feel unwell. Anyone who's watched my recent streams will know why. But I'm getting better. If I look sweaty, it's because it's warm. And also because I had an invigorating walk. You should have seen me. I was out there power striding like a guy who will be 30 soon, really taking care of myself. Anyway, jokes aside, I wanted to reiterate something incredibly important that I have talked about before, but I wanted to deliver it in a sort of clear and concise package, not only for the benefit of my audience, but in case they wanted to show something like this to anyone they know. So, hello, person who knows a person who watches me, maybe. Hi, I hope you're doing well. Um, I want to talk about democracy really quickly. Democracy kind of sucks, but it's also all we have. It's not a great system as we implement it. I don't think any place in the world implements it particularly well. But you know what? It's the least terrible thing we've got, which is more than can be said about a lot of things in the world. And I care a lot about democracy. I often think that my fellow Americans, my compatriots, my peers, make poor decisions when it comes to who they vote for and what they vote for. But I am happy to live in a country where that is a choice they get to make. And for the longest time, in my work on my channel, I have strived to make political change in the way you're supposed to in a democracy, which is changing people's minds. As long as that's a thing you can do, as long as the system is receptive to what the people want, and the things the people want can be changed, updated, altered based on new evidence or better arguments, that's something worth preserving. And I fear that the preservation is now coming to an end because we may well be in the twilight hours of our democracy. Not exaggerating when I say that, there are plenty of threats to democracy. They're present all the time. Attempts to undermine our legal system or to introduce laws that are disruptive to our ability to proceed with a fair election. Attacks on democracy are a pretty frequent thing and near unavoidable thing in a democracy. This might well be its end. So I have here an article from Democracy Now!, a partisan website to be sure, but you can find similar articles all over the place. A Supreme Court argument is going to be heard soon. Not right this moment, because it is a summer recess for the fine Supreme Court justices, but it's Moore v. Harper, a case which seeks to reinstate gerrymandered congressional maps that were struck down by North Carolina's highest court. The basic thing is this. So there were a set of congressional maps that were built that were heavily gerrymandered, just like really biased, and they were struck down by the court of North Carolina, the highest court. And there was an appeal, and now they're throwing it to the Supreme Court. Basically, do we have a right to draw gerrymandered districts and not have them be struck down? See, this harkens to what is known as the independent state legislator doctrine, which is basically the idea that because the Constitution technically defers the power of election regulations to the state legislators, that would mean that the state legislators are the only institutions that get to dictate the direction of federal elections within their borders, which is weird because that would mean that state legislators, like let's just say the Ohio Republican state legislator, they would be able to, on their own, with no supervision, draft congressional districts or decide what gets done with state electors, even if it defies the will of their state Supreme Court, even if the state's judiciary rules it against their state constitution. It doesn't matter. The legislators could do like anything. Funnily enough, this doesn't apply to state elections, so they would actually need to have like two different systems. It's really, really complicated and weird. See, our Constitution is designed to be a living document, to evolve and be interpreted to fit the needs of the modern era. And while that can be a good thing, it also means that it's necessarily really vague about a lot of the direct prescriptions that it makes because it wants to leave wiggle room for things to change in the future. But if you have a really bad faith set of Supreme Court judges, hypothetically, they could start stripping away everything not specifically written in the Constitution. You know, a lot of the value of the Constitution and its amendments are the fact that it can be they can be interpreted in ways that, you know, benefit the public good. The right to gay marriage, the right to interracial marriage secured by the federal government. These things aren't enshrined in the Constitution. They're just interpretations of rules listed in the Constitution, not rules themselves, which means the Supreme Court can giveth and taketh away. So too exists the ability for the state Supreme Court and the state governor and the state constitution to regulate really bad legislator-drawn, gerrymandered voting districts. I don't want to undersell the severity of this problem, because what this effectively means is that state legislators could gerrymander into oblivion. I mean, virtually limitless gerrymandering. I mean, we're talking joke maps here, you know? They could do whatever the hell they wanted, and they could just, if things got that far, they could just, you know, refuse to send the state electors in a way which respects the voting wishes of the population of that state. In essence, it would give a state total control over the output of federal politicians produced from it, both legislatively and in the presidential electors. I don't want to beat around the bush here. The Republican Party committed pretty hard to the Biden stole the election thing. They are no strangers to the idea of just flat out overturning the Democratic rule. There are already state Republican parties that are officially saying that Biden did not properly win in 2020. The Texas GOP did that just recently, alongside a bunch of psychotic stuff. There are multiple state legislators that have already begun to purge and renew their electors to keep them in line. All evidence points to the idea that if the Supreme Court is successful in ruling on the most extreme version of the independent state legislator doctrine, which it seems like they might do, it would effectively be the end of democracy in our country. A majority of U.S. states have Republican-controlled legislators, because unfortunately the people most likely to vote in local elections are old, and old people are more likely to be Republican. We have a party that is essentially openly stated, committed to the notion that they do not respect the laws of our democracy, and now the Supreme Court, which is, of course, right now, hardline conservative, overturning precedent at a rapid rate, you have them being given the opportunity to rule on a case that would allow them to back the independent state legislator doctrine, which, if they do so in the most extreme possible way, would mean that all of these states with Republican-controlled legislators would have the ability to gerrymander their own federal, congressional districts into oblivion. It would mean the end of Democrats being able to sit in the House of Representatives. It just would. It would be the end of Democrats being able to win the presidential. It would be a coup. It would be an abuse of existing rules in order to commit a coup. It would negate the ability for us to resolve problems democratically. It is a mathematical advantage that cannot be overcome through any level of good performance on the part of the Democrats if the Republicans decide to go full faith or full bad faith with it. And personally, I don't think that a coup is any more legitimate if it's done legally. You know, if there are some poorly written rules in a democratic constitution where if you press the right buttons in the right order, you get to legally institute a dictatorship, a one-party dictatorship, I don't think that makes that one-party dictatorship any more legitimate. I think the threat of this Supreme Court ruling should be treated as an upcoming coup attempt. The legality is I think, not of import, you know? You could say that about anything, right? I mean, you know, Hindenburg appointed like Hitler, you know, as once you're in charge, you can change the rules and make what you do legal. You know, I don't want to sound like super cliche or whatever, but you know, the Holocaust was legal type arguments are at the end of the day valid. The state gets to decide what is and is not legal. And if the Supreme Court is set up in such a way that they are overturning precedent at an incredible rate, and they have the ability to overturn it in such a way as to effectively destroy our democracy, like, it's just a coup attempt. I can just imagine all like the smarmy people, you know, like back in like 30s Germany or whatever, like, well, technically Hindenburg had a right to appoint him as the, like, it doesn't, like, yeah, history will not smile upon these arguments. That's all I'm saying. This is a real threat, and unless the Democrats do something, unless the DOJ starts actually arresting Republicans for being complicit in January 6th, an attempt to overturn the democratic results of an election, I don't see what exactly we can do. The court needs to be reined in. This is not like a, oh, well, we'll point out that what the Republicans are doing is bad and they'll stop type deal. Pointing out that Republicans are wrong has never stopped them from continuing to do things that are wrong. They keep doing them. It doesn't matter. Nothing changes. So action needs to be taken here, or we will legitimately not have a democracy. We won't. The ability for us to influence the outcomes of our elections will be effectively supplanted. It'll be a one-party state. There's not much good news here. It's a desperately dangerous situation. I mean, I ask people for solutions, and I don't know what they expect will happen. The Democrats have the ability to throw a wrench in these plans, to actually save our democracy, to preserve it by preventing the Supreme Court from engaging in this behavior. The DOJ has an incredible amount of power to disrupt the undemocratic plans of the Republican Party, but they just don't use it. They are abstemious. In large part, I think, because a lot of people genuinely believe it could never happen here. They think there's some kind of magical force field in America that prevents this country from experiencing the hardships that we see abroad, the tyranny and dictatorship. But we're not far off from it here, Like, we were an apartheid state until the 1960s. I mean, that's really not that long ago. The Nazis modeled a lot of their eugenics plan off the writing of American authors, and the Nazis were popular here in the United States up until the war began, at which point it became taboo to openly support the enemy. We threw the Japanese in internment camps on the West Coast during the war, fruitlessly, just hundreds of thousands of people, for no reason other than because they shared a race with one of our enemies. We're not that far off. We're just not. People want to believe that we're better, but we're not. And a lot of these beliefs would be recognized for the naivete they actually represent if people in other countries were to say them. Can you imagine if there was a threat of like a coup in Bangladesh or like South Africa or something, and you saw somebody in the news going, well, that can't happen there, that's ridiculous, and you'd think like, well, no, it totally can happen there, that can absolutely happen there. There's no reason why it couldn't happen there. It can happen here. We're really not that special. We're really, really not. The Republicans are going to represent a continuous threat to the legitimacy and effectiveness of our democracy for as long as they're allowed to continue down the path that they are. See, there's no such thing as a set of rules which are perfectly immune to, I should say, like, fiddling, being overruled. There's no set of protections a democracy can erect around itself that cannot be overcome. I remember reading when I was a young boy a book called Weapons. It was an educational illustrated manual on the history of weapons in humanity. It had lots of pretty drawings of cudgels from a million years ago, or like scimitars and stuff like that. Most of the book was about ancient weaponry because, well, ancient up to like the use of gunpowder, like not ancient, like, melee weaponry, because frankly, they made weapons prettier back then, they would draw fancy hilts and so on. But anyway, eventually there was a segment on modern fortifications, to juxtapose old castle walls. And it pointed out something that's kind of stuck with me, There is no set of fortification barriers or traps that you can place that can't be overcome if left alone. In fact, if left alone, they will eventually be overcome rather easily, A group of teenagers could overcome a barbed wire fence, a trench, a moat, and a wall pretty easily, actually. You need people guarding them. You need people actively watching and guarding. So the Great Wall of China on its own is just a rock wall that can be scaled with rope or with plank bridges, or walked around, which is kind of what happened. You need people manning the wall. We need people manning the walls of our democracy. The existence of a a sturdy set of institutional barriers is not enough on their own, because all it takes is for Republicans acting in bad faith to achieve power and slowly unwind them, replacing circuit court judges, getting extremists in their group of state legislators, getting extremists on the Supreme Court, stonewalling all congressional action until the time comes. They undo all the work. They weaken the fortifications, and then when eventually they do attain power, they can make it so that they never lose power. They will make it so they can't lose elections. They will just suspend elections altogether. They could declare martial law if they wanted to. They really wanted to triple down on the constitutional crisis. You need people manning the fortifications. And in this case, that would be the DOJ. That would be the Democrats actually taking their job seriously, so Biden is not remembered as the president who lost democracy. This abstemiousness will get us nowhere. The Republicans will scream coup, will scream foul play if the DOJ starts arresting people for sedition, which is what Republican politicians committed when they were associated in any way with Jan 6. But the Republicans screamed coup and foul play when Biden legitimately won the election. You can't let their threats, their frights, prevent you from doing what needs to be done to preserve our democracy. They will cry bully their way into a fascist dictatorship. We simply cannot allow them to do this. Anyway, yeah, that's the argument. We'll see how things develop. Hopefully I'm wrong about all this, but unfortunately, I don't think there's any reason to believe that I am. I'm far from the only person who's claiming that this is a real threat, and I'm far from the only person characterizing it in the way that I am. This could very well be the end. And what's scary is that unlike Jan 6, which, though it was a legitimate threat to our democracy, it was also illegal, which gives Democrats the pretext to fight against it. The potential Supreme Court ruling in Moore v. Harper would be technically legal. And that barrier of legality is, it seems, the only thing that Democrats need in order to stand by and watch as the democracy of the world's strongest nation crumbles into dust. You wouldn't have to break any laws to stop them, by the way. Again, seriously, the DOJ could charge so many Republicans with sedition. It is crazy. They just choose not to, They just don't want to. That Clarence Thomas, failing to disclose that he was ruling against the release of documents that implicated his wife in Jan 6, there's so much stuff they could get him on. They just don't, because Democrats are weak and cowardly, and they believe everything's going to work out just fine, and they're worried that the Republicans might yell at them if they exercise their power. Oh, yeah. Good luck to us, huh? Good luck to us.